faculty member in the Department of World Languages, Literatures and Cultures, along with my colleagues in Italian, Dr. Louise Rosier, Anthony Sargenti, and Claudia Benevic. We are happy to have the opportunity to host Dr. Robin Pickering-lazzi here at the University of Arkansas. Before introducing our guest of honor, however, I would like to thank the Italian Club and Il Circolo for all of their hard work and dedication for making this event a success tonight. I'm finishing my 5th year here at the U of A, and with each year our program continues to grow, as well as the motivation and passion that I see from the club and the officers. We have an ex-officer here who was actually one of the founding members of the resurgence of the club. And this year the club has hosted 2 wonderful lectures, the first on Italian Americans by Professor Pugliese in November, and of course our lecture tonight on the Mafia and Anti-Mafia in Italy. Can the officers please stand for a minute? Okay. Can we give them a round of applause for all of this? All of the faculty and I are very proud of you and personally thank you for the amazing job that you've done this afternoon. Now, it is my honor and privilege to introduce Dr. Robin Pickering-lazzi, who holds a PhD in Italian from the University of Washington. Dr. Pickering-lazzi is currently Professor of Italian and Chair of the Department of French, Italian, and Comparative Literature at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Robin has been a pioneer in the field of women's studies within the Italian landscape. Her research spans the gamut from fascism to the present through literature, film, media, and cultural studies. She, I believe, is currently the leading Mafia Anti-Mafia scholar in North America. She is the author and editor of 9 monographs, among her most recent, The Mafia and Italian Lives in Literature, Life Sentences and Their Geographies, 2015, and the Italian Anti-Mafia, New Media and the Culture of Legality, edited both with the University of Toronto Press. Her current research projects include representations of femminicidio and also Italian post-geographic identities. The title of her talk this evening is Italian Mafia and Anti-Mafia in the Age of New Media. Without further ado, I present Robin Pickering-lazzi.
I must say that your words, that's high praise from somebody who I admire tremendously, so it means an awful lot to me. And it also means a lot to me. I'm just extremely grateful that you students in the Circolo Italiano invited me. And you've been just so gracious, and Professor Calabretta Sager's hospitality has been amazing, and I'm enjoying my stay here in Fayetteville. It's an impressive university because of very impressive students and faculty, so thank you. I want to start out by just saying that I think most of us think of the Italian mafias as something distant, something that doesn't touch our lives. If we think of it in real terms, it's over there across the ocean. I would hazard to say, however, that today it is likely that most each and every one of us has in some way come in contact with a product of the mafia. Whether it is that extra virgin olive oil that you've chosen so very carefully, whether it is that wonderful Italian product that you've ordered on the internet, or maybe in the course of research for one of your courses, or just for fun, you've visited certain sites on the internet. In other words, the mafias in Italy, and there are over 4 of them, they keep popping up with new names and new locations, but we would say that the primary ones would be Cosa Nostra, primarily in Sicily. You have the Camorra, primarily in Campania. Again, keeping in mind they have transnational relations in criminal activities. And then Ndrangheta, that is extremely effective because though its home place, so to speak, would be in Calabria, it has managed successfully to transfer clans into Piedmont, Lombardy. I don't know if any of you heard of Expo, the food expo that Italy had and was so proud of. Well, Ndrangheta had something over $2 million in public contracts for the building of those pavilions. So the mafia today, through the internet and in other ways, is something that does impact our lives one way or another. And that will be in part what I'll talk to you about, because what I'd like to do first is to kind of chart the 2.0 mafias, all of them that are working on the internet. And one of the things that we can say is that the Italian mafias, since their origins, and 4 of them originated back in the 1800s, have shrewdly been able to adapt to changing social, cultural, and political and economic conditions, while remaining true to themselves, by which I mean their own self-interest. Self-interest in terms of power, in terms of profit. And I will also look at the 2.0 anti-mafias. And I tend to talk about the anti-mafia, but today really, in Italian scholarship, they talk about anti-mafias. So these seem to be evolving in different kinds of ways. First of all, with the 2.0 mafias online, some of the ways that we encounter them. They use the internet. It has become absolutely key to their kinds of enterprises, criminal enterprises. For example, setting up deals for human trafficking, whether it is for prostitution, pornography, or the trafficking in nuclear arms and weapons, or counterfeit goods, which is one of these areas in which they're making extreme profits. In fact, between the 3 major mafias, their profits are over $100,000, or excuse me, $100 billion per year. It's so big. I don't think in those terms. I think in thousands, not $100 billion or something. So their profits are absolutely amazing. The internet is also used, for example, among the younger generation. It's used a lot, Facebook, to keep in touch with other mafiosi. Those of middle age are using it oftentimes when they're fugitives, to stay in touch, to give their orders, to know what's going on. It's also critical for the pizzo, for the extortion racket, to keep tabs and enforce their power. One thing to keep in mind too is that though we've seen this migration of mafias onto web space, it is critical for them also to keep control on the physical geography of their different territories. They will still, bomb somebody's store if they're not going to pay the extortion money. So they keep control in both places. The anti-mafias. With the anti-mafias, it's very interesting how they have migrated, particularly after 1992 with the massacres of Judges Falcone and Borsellino. You see this burst of proliferation of anti-mafia websites, social networks that go online and that attempt to form communities of people who will oppose not just the mafias but all corruption, which clearly links up then with politics and with the state and government, as well as regional government, as well as city government. And so they really have this multi-frontal kind of an endeavor in front of them. And one of the interesting things is they are highly effective. If you think, for example, about Libera against the mafias, they are a network of over 114,000 schools and organizations, primarily in Italy, but they also have schools and organizations that are in other parts of Europe as well as the United States. The same thing with the Pizzo, the organization against the extortion racket. And they have amazing numbers of individuals, primarily young people. And this is one of the key issues that I think needs more attention. Young people, grassroots, who give their names, who give their contact information, and do volunteer work in cities, at schools. They're always going into schools with their different kinds of initiatives, trying to teach, and this may be difficult for us, but trying to teach young people from elementary school on how they can live without favors from the local mafiosi. So how do you get a hospital bed? without paying some money to have it, to maybe, you know, go through childbirth or to have an operation. So for the very essentials, I think, for which we have ostensibly free access in a liberal democracy, and you think, well, Italy is a liberal democracy, but many of these rights and services are not free when you're in territories. Again, throughout Italy, there are sections of Milan that are just as bad with Ndrangheta. We do not have free access to these goods and services. Another thing with the anti-mafia, the 2.0 anti-mafia sites, it's interesting because their internal architecture, they have a twofold scope. It's not just to spread information about the anti-mafia. One of the things that they find is critical is spreading information about the mafia, what's going on right now. Because we're currently, since 1993, we're currently in a period when the Italian mafias adopt, primarily Cosa Nostra in Sicily, a strategy of invisibility. In other words, no more bombing so that you explode part of a highway or you explode part of a neighborhood in order to kill a figure who is prominent in public life, such as Judge Falcone, Paolo Borsellino, Judge Morvillo, and their bodyguards in 1992. Rather, this is not to say that you don't have murders when people don't follow orders, but rather they use lupara bianca, which means killing someone and then destroying the body so there is no trace. Okay? Therefore, one of the things that the anti-mafia sites try to do is to spread information about current mafia activities, as well as exposés on historical cases that have still been left open. They are these mysteries of Italy that have never been solved. Even with Borsellino's murder, you have the mystery of the red agenda. He always carried a red agenda. He wrote all of his notes in that. After Falcone was murdered, he had notes about who should be interviewed, who was likely the person ordering this killing, and the red agenda, this notebook, has never been found. So they, the people who contribute to the site for Libera against the mafia, or Ammazzateci tutti, kill us all is its name, in other words, the mafia, kill us all, we're 100,000, just try, right? And other sites, Addio Pizzo. One of the things they'll do is you'll have videos, you have testimonial videos, exposés, and usually you have discussion forums too, because what they want is they want participation. Okay? Let me go on a little bit too. One other function that I think is extremely important is the way that the anti-mafia sites, by continually training their sites on mafiosi, they challenge and contradict a lot of the cultural products of the 2.0 mafias on the web. Cultural products of the 2.0 mafias tend to be visual images of mafiosi that promote the myths of being a benign kind of mutual aid society, the myth that they follow a so-called code of honor, the myth that they are so-called men of respect, the myth that they stand for and help those who are vulnerable in their society. I mean, it's historically proven that time after time they stand with those who have money and who have power to increase their own money and power, right? They don't go to the poor for that. On the contrary, they've tended to always be against the peasant class or those who are poor. So as soon as you have the anti-mafia images coming out, sometimes in real time, video of arrests, people who are found, then you have visual evidence that chips away at some of these romanticized images. One of the things too is that we might think about face bosses, they're often called, because there are many Facebook pages that are dedicated to Totorina, for example, who was convicted of over 100 homicides and atrocious acts, or Provenzano, other mafiosi, and you have basically fanboys, and I'm not singling out the males, but they tend to be, at least if you can trust the identities they write, they do tend to be young males who write these, you know, adorational types of messages on the walls and everything. So that type of activity, it promotes this cultural consensus or support and drives also fantasies among other people about, you know, fantasies, desires for social and economic mobility, and you know, and thinking that these people have achieved it and somehow following these models. So those types of face bosses are extremely dangerous when you're, you know, when you're navigating the web. Lirio Abate, whose work is just wonderful, he's an online journalist. A lot of his work is anti-mafia. He does these beautiful exposés. But he states, for example, quote, "The virtual mafia community is made of real bosses, often hidden behind an alias or sometimes using their real identity, accompanied by photographs and comments, and the internet has allowed them to gather an unforeseen reserve of consensus to which groups dedicated to super bosses attest," so that it's not something that we can just take lightly. The second part of Anti-Mafia, 2.0 Anti-Mafia on the web, in addition to documenting the mafia's current and past activities, is also to create, or recreate, we should say, civil society in Italy. So giving that responsibility to individual citizens to behave in honest ways, ethical ways, for example, not cheat on taxes. You know, that's something that can be a problem anywhere in the world, right? But behaving honestly, and this is in the creation of a culture of legality. Many times, if you go onto the Italian sites, you'll see them talk about la cultura della legalità. Now, a culture of legality, and I'm not that happy with the term. We had to use it in the book systematically. As you know, laws, the dominant laws of a nation, have also been used to commit genocide and to single out certain sectors of society, so that one needs a critical sense. So I'm going to turn to Piero Grasso, who, as many of you, if you follow Italian news and politics in the elections, he went from the Partito Democratico, also the left, the Democratic Party, he created a party, Liberi e Uguali, so free and equal. But he was an anti-mafia judge and quite committed to it. And as he explains, this culture of legality is a system of principles, ideas, and behaviors that must move toward the realization of a person's values, human dignity. And you will find that human dignity is a theme that recurs a lot in anti-mafia movements and organizations, such as Dio Pizzo. You know, a whole populace, they're saying, a whole populace that pays the pizzo, extortion money, is a populace without dignity. Okay? But human rights, principles of freedom, equality, democracy, truth, and justice as a method of living together in civil society. So they're trying to recreate civil society in this way with ideals that I think most of us can identify with. Now, all of these sites give us different ways to participate, and I think it's appropriate now to talk about mediation and remediation. We're all here, and I do a lot of work on space and interactive kinds of dynamics, physical, personal, etc., that create space. Here we are, essentially, each of you is creating and contributing to this anti-mafia space, right? Because we're here with this talk that turns a critical eye onto the mafias. Okay? Now, if one of you were to take out an electronic device and take a photograph, right, you would mediate this particular interaction. Because let's face it, we're going to all scatter at the end of this talk and the discussion. I'm depending on all of you to have good questions and topics and put me on the spot. Okay? But then we scatter afterwards. This is a transitory moment. It's a transitory space. I would hope that some of you will keep reflecting and you'll take elements of this along with you as you scatter. But at any rate, if you mediate this moment and you create a photo, at that point, you can look at that photo on your telephone or a different device, right? But it's still you in the photo and maybe somebody that you physically show. Remediation, it's key both to the 2.0 mafias and anti-mafias because it would be taking that photo that somehow testifies, it bears witness to the space that we create, a transitory space. And once you import that onto Twitter, onto Facebook, Snapchat, WhatsApp, you've remediated it, which has two meanings, because if you remediate, you're actually reforming this media product, right? But you're also making it better by giving it something it lacked. If you put it on Twitter, what do you suddenly give this photo, this piece of testimony? You give it an audience. Yeah? If you put it on Facebook, you give it an audience. WhatsApp, Snapshot for a short time. Okay? Now, the audience, and again, keep in mind the Italian context of the mafias and anti-mafias. Once you give an audience, people can come on. We'll take Facebook, for example. They might put likes, they might put the sad face, they might put wow, whatever. And more importantly, they may be engaged, depending on the content. They may be so engaged that they write a thoughtful comment and say, wow, new idea. I'm thinking about civil society. What can I do to make it better? And then they share it, and out it goes to whoever they have in their network of friends. From there, maybe somebody actually downloads it, and they might make that photo better. I don't know, they may put in special effects. They might put it to music. Who knows what they'll do, because many of you are extremely talented. There's a high bar of virtuosity, I think, with many of these medial products. And then it may go out onto Twitter, it may be put on a lot of different areas. Now, I was once at a conference in Rome on transnational crime, and in my session, I had Umberto Santino. I had presented on new media and the Anti-Mafia, and he, who is probably one of the foremost experts on the mafia and anti-mafia, the head of the Center of Documentation, Giuseppe Impastato, looked at me rather paternalistically and said, yes, but it's not real. It's not real. In other words, for him still, one needed to be physically present. You needed to be marching on the streets of Palermo. I take a totally different view. My view is this, that what you see is ideology. If you see it as ideology, somehow you're being, it's your imagined relationship to something. Now just think of what you see on the web, and if you put it on the web, you're creating that possibility, and the very possibility to me is of great significance that someone will identify with this, it will engage their thoughts, they will start thinking, and perhaps in their daily practices, maybe incorporating certain ideas just about opposing corruption, helping those who are in need of help. It doesn't have to be specifically you go out and you fight Mandara, okay? But also, as you navigate the web, you're a little bit more critically aware that if you buy that beautiful but fake, really low-priced Prada purse, that money is very likely going to pay the mafioso's lawyers or support their family if the mafioso's in jail. So being critical consumers, in that kind of a sense, ethical consumers. So that's remediation, and it's key to a lot of what Libera does. Again, remediating videos, remediating different kinds of cultural products, ideas, images, and it's critical, I think, also to what we can do together online. Now, you might say, well, what does this matter? We talk about reality. I mean, how's this going to hurt the mafia? Again, remember Lirio Abbate's words, that the mafia, behind those images on Facebook, they're all real mafiosi. Similarly, the mafia takes challenges, mere words or images, challenges to its power, to its image. They don't want the image, the romanticized image, tarnished. So if the kinds of products that you put out do draw attention to the realities of mafia, whether it's power, it's oppression, it's threatening of journalists, it's threatening of business people who won't pay extortion money, and I tend to call it extortion. It's protection money to protect the owner from the very mafia that's asking for the money, right? So get your mind around that. At any rate, that these kinds of challenges, even if they're on the web, they're in virtual space, that they're important. Piero Grasso, again, for example, states, the mafia is concerned about public opinion and how it can be influenced. It tries to capture people's consent and therefore, as totalitarian regimes, physically eliminates people who try to fight it, even with words. And it is important that in 2015, some 2,300 Italian journalists have been physically threatened or assaulted, and between 30 and 50 reporters are on, they have bodyguards 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So it is something that has material kinds of effects. Now, in these kinds of spaces, I want to go on. Let me just look at the time because I need to keep track. Otherwise, I'll just go, I'll have you here at midnight. But at any rate, one of the things that is very interesting online, I think, are testimonial videos. In part because these are often made by what I call citizen artists. They're not made by professional filmmakers or anything. And they're extremely important because they give us the opportunity for online witnessing in the way that your photograph of this event would allow any audience online then to become a witness to this creation of anti-mafia space, so to speak, opposition towards the mafia. These videos also enable you to bear witness in a sense. You witness what is represented in the video, which is also a performance of witnessing. And let me be clear about this. For example, the videos that are on Falcone, oftentimes young people, especially those who were young and growing up when Falcone was at his high point with the Maxi trials in the 1980s and had over 400 mafiosi locked behind bars in this huge bunker to try them, and for the first time was successful at doing so, with over 300 of them sentenced, and the sentences held up then, even when they went under appeal. And these young people will make short videos what Falcone means to him, and they might take trips around the city of Palermo. They might look at the memorial that's dedicated to him, a huge pyramid that's on the freeway going from the airport into Palermo. So amazing videos with an amazing following, as a matter of fact, because in April of 2015, there were some 21,000, and I'm talking about YouTube. You can easily access them and remediate them if you wish. But at any rate, 21,000 were produced in memory of Giovanni Falcone. You had certain films among those that had over 125,000 viewings, because certainly the number of viewings is important. And one of the things that I look to as a cultural critic, when possible, and it's very pertinent to the song that we'll watch, but are the comments that are left. Do the comments somehow show that somebody's engaged in some way, whether it's with the beauty of a product, whether it's with the ideas of a product. And so looking at the number of viewings is one thing, then looking at the number of comments, and then the quality of comments to try to get some kind of an idea so you can interpret, and you're not just looking at numbers, which can, they can be misleading without a doubt. But in the case of Paolo Borsellino, for example, too, you have 21,000. You could see a much smaller number, right? 125,000, 21,000 dedicated to him and his life's work. And then Rita Atria. How many of you have read anything by Rita Atria, or did you watch the film? There's the documentary by Marco Turco, and then there's the movie.
The Sicilian Girl, we watched it.
You did? Okay. I'd love to hear your comments on that one. But at any rate, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, in her case, you have over 2,000 videos. It is interesting, though, that you do have poetry dedicated to her, that people write. You have different kinds of photographs of her. She's quite diffused on the internet. if you start looking into her. And then, and I know that you watched the 100 Steps, I 100 Passi, with telling the story of Giuseppe Impastato. There are some 4,000 short films. Some of them are highly imaginative. There's an animated one that if you're interested in it, I can give you the title afterwards, but it's very impressive. One of the things that I think is of importance with these kinds of materials is how they contribute to what we could call the criminal imaginary. Okay? Thinking about mafia, the criminal imaginary, just what kind of an image is that dominant image in Western society, and as far as we can gauge it, and it's often, formed in large part on the Godfather films. It's a constant reference. But equally important, and I think this needs a tremendous amount of new work, is the anti-mafia imaginary. Okay? What is it? What ideas do we have towards the law and those who enforce the law? And I think a lot more work really needs to be done on that. And these testimonial videos allow us, I think, to see how the populace, at least in Italy, and sometimes foreigners too do these kinds of videos, foreigners from the Italian perspective, but how they then recreate the images and the meanings of these anti-mafia heroes. Here I want to introduce the topic of affect. Affect is extremely important when you talk about mediation and remediation in general, and this also sets up the frame for the video, the music that we're going to watch very shortly. Affect. It seems, based upon the studies of experts, that strong affect, even if it's negative, can solicit active participation. People writing things on the web, people remediating, people producing things and putting them out on the web. Outrage. You see an injustice. You see someone, helpless being beaten. But it is an affect of non-pleasure. It's not pleasurable, right? In a similar way, in thinking about some of these anti-mafia heroes, Falcone, just incredible people, the affect after they are murdered, right, massacred essentially, it's an affect of trauma, of mourning, right, sadness. And what we'll see, thinking about anti-mafia music, right after the massacres of 1992 with Borsellino, Falcone, the bodyguards, and Judge Morvillo, who was Falcone's wife, and she also worked in the anti-mafia field because she was a juvenile judge and tried to help out these kids from the streets before the mafia got to them. So when they first got into trouble, she would try to get them on the straight and narrow, so to speak. So she was also active. But in terms of anti-mafia music, right after the massacres, you have a whole wave of songs that come out, Giovanotti, and let me just get you the right titles and also the right year. Okay? With Giovanotti, 1992, and this was right after Falcone's funeral, he came out with the song Cuore, it means heart. And it's interesting because he never produced that. I'd have to check again today, but at least by 2015, he never wanted it produced and released for profit. Okay? So his song, Cuore, I want to give you one quote because it really expresses the affect of the time, which was giving voice to public trauma, to mourning, to outrage. And his song declares, quote, "The young people say farewell to Judge Falcone's coffin. They need an answer. They need protection. The young are tired of the bosses in power. The young can't stand by and watch as the land of their promise burns and all their ideals are destroyed," unquote. And you can on YouTube, you can see these, these songs. So if any of you are interested, I, suggest, because one of the things is that these kinds of songs are in all different kinds of genres. Okay, there's not one typical genre for a song that then has anti-mafia meanings. Then there's a different perspective from the group Stadio. That group composed and sang Per la bandiera, for the flag. And it is sung from the position of the bodyguards. And the bodyguards often are not represented. And I'll tell you a little aside here. Both in my book, The Geographies of the Mafia in Italian Lives and Literature, that was looking at literature, and I was also looking a bit online, as well as the edited volume, the copy editor, as well as the publisher, said, because I was insisting on putting all of the bodyguards' names, you know, and they said, no, that's too long, you can put that in a note. And I said, at least once you've got to give them memories. They had names, they had families. And so it's very interesting about how a certain commodity, whether it's a book or whatever, these things have, in a sense, worked to erase certain people who also gave their lives just as courageously, right, for justice, for honesty, for some kind of equality for all Italians. Sorry about that aside, but that does make this one song very interesting because, again, it's sung from the positions of the bodyguards and kind of highlights their commitment to the law, their commitment to their families, and the sense of their lives being so very tenuous. Last, for that, for these examples, there's the song Assolti, Absolved. And this one came out in 2001, so a different time period. You have a different political group in power, and it was during the time, it was right after Berlusconi had been in power and had dismantled many of the laws that went into effect in 1992 and 93, right after the murders of Falcone and Borsellino, to tighten up the sentences, the 40 bis, and make it easier to prosecute the mafia. Well, Berlusconi had dismantled a lot of those, and if any of you followed him during that time period, he was always raving about how all the judges were crazy, they were not to be trusted, they were politically invested, they didn't stand for justice, so really tearing them down and tearing down public, faith in them. And so RAF, R-A-F is the name, yeah. They came out with the song Assolti, and reflecting that time period then, one line in the lyrics state that the mafiosi aren't worried at all, quote, they know the verdict will arrive without fail, sooner or later, declaring them absolved, unquote. Okay? So here again you have this sense of outrage, a sense of trauma over what has happened before, non-pleasure. What I want to propose to you is that with the video that you're going to watch very shortly, that what you have is a shift in affect that is associated with or expresses anti-mafia subjectivity. And this shift goes to pleasure, a pleasure in remembering those who died, the pleasure, an act of joy, an act of happiness, building a new future. So there's, to me, there is a huge shift. This particular song is a song that the lyrics were rewritten by the group called the Pickering-lazzi, and they're out of Catania. And for the 20th anniversary of the massacres, the 1992 massacres, they rewrote the lyrics. The song was originally by, I should give you the title, Juan Moro, and this is Sicilian dialect, Facilita Nun Moro. And my Sicilian dialect pronunciation, you would do much better, Claudia. No, I didn't do Brian. But it's a beautiful dialect. But it means, when I die, make it so I don't die. The song was originally written by Rosa Balestrieri, who was one of the early women who opposed publicly the mafia in her songs. This song was dedicated, however, to the partisans. And it also kind of drones. I don't know if you can listen also to the original on YouTube, it's there. But it's like this dirge, and her voice is very deep and everything. Well, the Pickering-lazzi rewrote some of the lyrics and dedicated it on the 20th anniversary of the massacres to the anti-mafia movement, to all of those then, to all who keep living and fighting against the mafias. And a few things to keep in mind. Now, The YouTube video was uploaded on the 20th of June 2012. When they performed it in the downtown streets of Catania, there was actually a flash mob. And there was someone filming, and so they could piece it together to make the YouTube video and everything when they uploaded it then in June. And in their own words, okay, what they say is that this, this particular performance is, quote, a hymn to memory, lived not through mourning, but in a but in a positive, sunny, joyous key. So in a certain sense, it inspires this kind of sonorous memory work that goes towards the past, but I think projects to the future. And it says they also wanted to make an artistic, quote, an artistic and civic contribution to the memory of all the people who have dedicated and now dedicate their lives to building a different, free, humane Sicily, so that their ideas and their messages of hope and struggle may continue to live together with us, with joy, with determination. So this becomes, I think, a performative enactment of anti-mafia joy and committed action, right, to recreating Sicilian society. But it's something that each of us can do. Not each of us, I for one, not each of us can be so dedicated to justice, to honesty, to truth, that we live in a bunker, right? That we give up our personal lives. It's very hard to identify, I think, with the model of Falcone, the model of Borsellino. They seem superhuman, and so do their families, their children. It's amazing, even today, to see how they live and what they do. But we can identify with this, I'm going to propose. And one of the reasons I think, and we're going to watch this, is that as you watch the visual movements, it's not important that you understand the lyrics, though they will be made available to you after the talk. If you watch the instruments, you watch the movements of instruments and body, the rhythm of the song, the faces, and you will see masks. The first time I saw the video, I was shocked. My mouth dropped open, because the masks are the visual images, the photographs of Borsellino, of Falcone, Giuseppe Impastato, there's Rita Atria, in Fava, also Pepe Fava, who was a journalist who was assassinated by the mafia also, and very dedicated to truth and justice in his reporting. There's one of Rosa Balestrieri, who has a very broad face and glasses, and she was not murdered by the mafia. But the other masks are people who were. You see them on these people dancing through the streets. Okay, keep it in mind. But I think that that the movements of rhythm, sound, the visual are so welcoming, so inclusive. They make you want to get up and dance. They're, the joy just seems to spread. So we're going to watch the video now, and at this point, I want to invite all of you, if you haven't taken any visual image yet of this grand event, then what I'd like you to do is to go ahead. You can take out a cell phone, whatever you use, and if you wish to, this is an invitation because we're not mafia here, so no exposure or anything. But at any rate, go ahead and take a shot of a scene that catches your eye. And when I did this, what I found was that clearly the images move, right? So when I saw something I liked, I was taking 3-4 shots. I just kept my thumb down or whatever. You will see that you're going to go from isolated bodies that are going to join together gradually. Then you have all of this crowd at the end that ends up in the main piazza of Catania, clearly identifiable with its elephant that is in the middle of it and everything. So that will kind of prepare you. The singer is fabulous. And then go ahead and take your shot, and then afterwards we'll talk a bit about the film, your questions, and then if you wish to upload that image, and you can certainly identify the event, right? Post it wherever you do your posting or whatever, if you wish. And you're going to be remediating, testifying to what we've done, what we've talked about, and you're going to give other people, whether at universities in the United States or anybody who happens to come in to whatever, you know, network or whatever you're using, the opportunity to say, oh wow, right? And who knows what can come of that. So let's get this show rolling, and if I just hit play, we're good, right?
Yeah.
life being able to sing that way, at any rate. Did anyone who took Professor Calabrita Sager's film course recognize someone in this? Yes? Extra points. I don't know what class he's in.
He's not even in any classes.
Oh, crap!
They were in his class, so I'm going to let them have the...
Let them have that direct on the balcony. The woman on the balcony, where was she? The lady, yes. Giuseppe Impastato, the actress who played his mother. So that when you think think about the intertextual, but also this creation of community. Here you have this actress tying her body, ties the movie impastato to this film, but also impastato to this. I love too the generational ties, right? Because when she comes out on her balcony, it's as if, God, what the hell is this noise, right? What's racket out here? There's a little bit of disdain. She looks, she recognizes, she goes in to get her mask and then joins everyone. So you have also this transgenerational kind of joy. Everyone of different ages is out there, and particularly the young too. But and when you think about the instruments, the Marazzano of Sicily, which goes back centuries, and it's very typical. That's part of this identity, musical identity. And you also have the Aboriginal, Australian Aboriginal instrument, the long, it could be 3 to 10 feet, the didgeridoo, I think it's pronounced. And so you have, just this amazing bridging of continents, of times, of people in joy, but a joy of memory, and this creation of society. And they're ongoing to stop.
There's also the poopy guy. I don't know if you know, but he has the poopy in the, it's the Fratelli Napoli, and when we go to Sicily, there's a...
Oh yes, the elderly man.
We'll go to his laboratory, and there'll be a demonstration there.
But is that him as a social actor?
Yeah, that's
Oh my God, fabulous.
So, yeah.
There's a new thing for you to write about.
Exactly.
Yeah, I didn't know that he was there as a social actor.
Yep.
Who's in this? Just, it's just incredible. One of the things too, if you do happen to post on a place where you can put at, and then the other group gets the post, do at ipercusonici. When I did mine and put out mine with ipercusonici, they answered back and said, grazie. They were just, they seemed so sweet, so nice, and so interactive. You're connected here across all these marvelous spaces. Questions, Tom, how would you like to run this?
Open to you guys.
Okay. Yes?
Specifically regarding the Facebook pages, has Facebook and other social media sites, have they actually done anything to try and crack down on that, or?
Nothing that has been serious, a big step, and considering what's happening right now with Facebook. I mean, it's amazing to me. At that time, it's interesting, about 5 years after Facebook was founded and came online, they were taking off images of women who were breastfeeding infants. Some new mothers and things were sharing their photos with family, friends, whatever, but women who were breastfeeding. Facebook was taking those off, saying they were pornographic, but they were leaving, Totorina up there with all of these, comments idolizing him. Oh, his power, oh, he's great, and everything. Now and then they will take off. There is in Europe a much stronger right to be forgotten. So that, and this is very problematic for the Anti-Mafia, the right to be forgotten. An individual can ask Google, Facebook to remove all images of them. Let's say I don't know, maybe you did something at a party or whatever, just think about our realities. You might write and say, okay, I want that taken off. And they do need to oblige you and take off. This has amazing implications for the mafiosi. There was, he was called Il Bel René, the handsome René, who was part of the gang in Milan in the 1970s. Was also guilty of murders. He was sentenced and everything. And the Anti-Mafia had put out articles on him. He went to the right to be forgotten. And so it came up that they would have to take off the media, unless it was the primary news source. If it was a newspaper that had reported on the event, they could leave it, but there could be no remediation. So that Libera, that remediates. There's also Casa Memoria Vittime Mafiae, or Vittime Mafia, I think they have it just in the singular, which is this counter monument for the dead, innocent victims of the Mafia. And every day they post who has died on that day, and every day there's someone. Sometimes there are 5 victims. They will put the post and they will remediate old articles, photographs, anything that there might be. So with this right to be forgotten, mafiosi, for example, criminals who have committed heinous crimes, they can have their these articles and things removed from secondary sources. They get their new start. Now the interesting thing with the handsome René is that his family started up a Facebook page and had this glorified, romanticized story of, you know, René and what he had done during the 70s and everything. So, you know, it's the power into the mafia, and certainly the numbers of individuals who have asked to take advantage of the right to be forgotten. There are high numbers of criminals on there. So it's not, you know, Robin Pickering-lazzi who got out of hand somehow. Excellent question. And no, you know, nothing, and that would be one thing that one could do, would be militate and lock it off. Or the other thing that one could do, thinking about Rita Borsellino, when politicians were saying, we're going off of Facebook. She says, no, we have to stay on Facebook. We have to occupy the spaces, doing good, fighting for justice, resisting mafia, so that people who want to do bad things don't have the space. I don't think that's possible on the internet, because I think it's just, you know, virtually infinite, but at the same time, create as much of a presence. You know, keep mediating, remediating these kinds of things, and so take on the battle that way. I thought she was quite acute in her response. So very good. Yes?
So relative to, let's say, like 10 years ago, when all this media was first starting to come about, how has the power of the mafia, or let's say the corruption inside politics with the police force, how has that changed with all this anti-mafia?
Oh wow, that's complicated. You've got several sectors there. And you get me back on track, so I'll try to keep keep the three straight. So mafiosi, politicians, and law enforcement, right? We're dealing with. Okay, so 1992 and everything is migrating online. Mafiosi, their abilities to conduct transnational crime have been increased manifold. And I would say that yes, they have increased profits enormously, because if you have billions of dollars of profit, and also the ability then also to conduct business more easily, I would say, with mafias in other countries, whether it's the Japanese mafia, the Russian mafia, different mafias located around the globe, United States, you know, mafias for that matter too, you can't forget those, and Milwaukee. Yeah. We know that territory.
Stories of dinner.
I know, my husband keeps saying there's going to be a drive-by in front of my house. They're going to, but at any rate. So that has increased their power. Now, it would be unwise to say, well, law enforcement hasn't kept up with it. They've used, and in fact, Italian law enforcement, if any of you are interested in going into that field, they're on the cutting edge, because they recognized the problem right away. They got in at the ground level, began tracking them. So they have all types of surveillance methods that I know nothing about, the nuts and bolts of it, but they're extremely effective. On Facebook too, part of what they mine on Facebook is the people who hang out with these mafiosi who cannot resist posting when they're at a birthday party or in a speedboat, and see who's with them. So they start making these maps of clans, known, acquaintances, that kind of a thing, and sometimes they make their arrests too based on that. But then they have all sorts of other ways then of gathering data from the internet, and they've done an amazing job. With the Italian state, I myself always have to be extremely careful, because it is known so much for corruption, and yet you had Falcone, Borsellino, General della Chiesa, who in the 80s, they were also servants of that very same state. So corrupt parts of the state, parts of politics are very large, I would say. It is interesting that with the recent elections in Italy, where you essentially have a stalemate, at least, right before I left Milwaukee, with the 5-star movement, which I think in many things has as its goal returning a political life and responsibility to citizens, its ways of achieving it are sometimes questionable. But I think they're essentially, you know, they haven't been in power, so they can't have been, you know, manipulated by mafia. Then you have Lega, which is in the north, and they have another majority, and somehow either the Five Star Movement or Lega, they've got to get some more votes from different political parties. Now, Di Matteo, who is the current major anti-mafia judge, and is currently trying the case that is on the agreement, the so-called agreement between the Italian government, and there were parts of law enforcement involved in that, as well as major politicians, with the mafia. It was back in the 1990s, right before Borsellino was killed. There was this meeting to discuss an agreement so that Rina would stop all of the massacres of public figures in Italy. And what it meant was that whoever then was in the judiciary would back off from some of these laws. Reportedly, from anti-mafia journalist sites, Borsellino refused it. He said, you can't deal with the mafia. You just can't. And we know what happened to him. But Di Matteo is now trying this case. There's a marvelous video on YouTube. It's a documentary in English for any of you who do not speak Italian. I'd say do watch it. And so the connection then with law enforcement, there are very honest parts of law enforcement. There are sectors of law enforcement that have become corrupt, either out of fear because relatives have been threatened. You were talking to me, someone was the other night, I think, but the cases happen very frequently. Let's say you have a grandson going to elementary school and you have a photograph that says your grandson, you get anonymously, right? Your grandson is a very cute kid, and it's right in front of their school, and you all of a sudden know vulnerable you are. So I'd say that political, well, the reason I mentioned Di Matteo, he said that right now, the time, given the fact that there's no clear majority in the political situation right now, which I read has, no politicians with whom the mafias have some kind of an in, so the time is right that the mafia may have a frontal attack on the state again. That news came out from him, I think, 3 days ago. So, did that answer it? Okay. Yes?
So how would you say the role of judges in like political justice is comparable to like the role of judges here in the United States? It sounds like judges are a lot more influential in Italy than they are here.
That's my impression too, and sometimes, you know, my husband is Italian and grew up in that system. And sometimes I'll say, but Paolo, can you explain this to me? I have to say, even though he grew up in it, he doesn't always understand it. It's extremely complex. And judges, for example, Judge Borsellino and Judge Falcone, they were more like, we think that they're judges, they're called magistrates, but they're like public prosecutors and specialized then in anti-mafia. Now, and Grasso became a politician. It's true that you do have some activist judges who become, and quite a few actually have gone from being judges to becoming politicians. Public opinion in general in Italy, and I think a lot of this it comes again from Berlusconi, from his constant rhetoric that was against judges. But public opinion tends to be very low of judges. And so when I speak to Italians, I always remind them, but look, Di Matteo is a judge. But look, Falcone was a judge. In other words, you have to try to pick out some of them who are honest and doing very good work and, you know, really putting their lives on the line for it. So, did that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, yeah.
What do you think of some of the work before all these 2.0 media? Some people like Letizia. Her a little bit in class.
Oh, I think she is so fascinating.
Photographer, you know, the photographs that we looked at in class one day.
One of her lines when she said, what I have from the years of photographing mafia crime scenes, and going to crime scenes where people had been massacred, you know, just put into shreds by bombs and things. She said I had an archive of film. Oh my God, the photographs. But I think that with what are called her re-elaborations, one of the things I have my students do in the course on Italians and the Mafia is to go and look on the web for Letizia Battaglia re-elaborations. Because what she's done in the last 10 years is to, and I don't know if this is addressing the point you're going to, but she returned to those photographs of crime scenes. But also there's a very famous one of Falcone, for example, who is walking by a line of carabinieri at a funeral, and there's a fountain there of this water, so very symbolic, obviously, right? New life, water, baptism, but we know the ending of that story. But at any rate, she has re-elaborated, we could say remediated in a certain sense, because they're on the web, but re-elaborated them to insert images often of her granddaughter. So youth, another generation, and they're extremely provocative. Lots of times it's a new female figure, and so I think the positioning, I think where they are, and how does that figure then speak to the original figure that was in her photograph. So I think they're provocative. I think that they would participate in this same kind of a current. It would be here's another big project. To me, this as a current that is a cultural formation in the making of anti-mafia, right? That is joy, that is new life, that is, you know, going towards the future and looking at it in photography and music and the arts. You know, I love her work. She's just yes. Oh, yes. So rich. Sicilian culture is just so amazing.
So, like, talking about the media stuff, now the media focuses a lot on what is terrorism and stuff.
Yes.
So do you think that that kind of gives the mafia a bit of a break and have them have, like, more feel to, like, do whatever they want? Kind of because, like, they would be like, all right, now everyone is focused on terrorism and ISIS and bombing, so let's keep on doing mafia stuff.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. In fact, in the 1970s, when you had the years of lead in Italy with terrorism yet again, and it was with Red Brigades, but also the far right in the 60s, 70s, you go more towards the far left Red Brigades. But the mafia was making money hands over fists and getting its heroin refineries. The 70s are when heroin, you know, comes in and you have all the refineries. So I think that you nailed it, you know, perfectly. It's also interesting, I don't know if any of you noticed it, but when this whole discourse on terrorism and ISIS was sending out messages, you know, the Vatican's next and all of this, and you had a message from Cosa Nostra in New York that said, go handle ISIS, or something. I mean, it was just, it was amazing. The flip side of that, because with trafficking in nuclear arms and nuclear waste, it's very interesting, I think, that Italy has not, you know, very fortunate, Italy has not had any of these major incidents. And I've played with the idea that because the major mafias in Italy do traffic in arms, that potentially there is some quid pro quo on this, that they don't, the nuclear arms attacks from ISIS or other terrorist groups don't hit the, you know, but I don't, that's total speculation, so don't ever tell anybody because I ever shared it in her, who knows.
Do you agree with a lot of the mafia scholars that not that is the strongest defense?
I do, in the sense of their success of being able to set up crime plans in foreign countries. So for that reason, I do. And it is interesting that they were on.
But I think there's a mafia.
Yeah, and you know, because they're in Germany, they're also in the United States. If you look at the FBI's page. They have how many members of Cosa Nostra are ostensibly here, how many of the Camorristi, how many Ndranghetisti. There are only a few members, however, of the United Sacred Crown. And Sacra Corona Unita, which is in, in Puglia. Yeah, I do. What do you?
That's what I've heard. And even when I was on my Fulbright in Calabria, all of a sudden the airport in Reggio was closed. And I asked, well, what was that about? And they just said, I'm like, well, why were they closing it? They wanted it closed. There wasn't in the newspaper. I mean, the students told me. All of a sudden it's closed. And from one day to the next.
Wow. Yeah.
Calabria is big. So it's long. So.
Yeah.
That means you have to go to Messina, and then all the way back up to Zara.
Right. Yeah.
So.
I think another thing too about Ndrangheta, because I just did a review on a book. It's called Women of Honor, and it talks about women who, by birth or marriage, have active roles in Ndrangheta, the Camorra, and Cosa Nostra. There were two interesting things that I found. And that was that with Ndrangheta, these women born into the families and who take on active roles and sometimes then wish to leave are almost never ever successful. They end up suiciding themselves because they're under such close control by the male Ndranghetisti and even elderly women who will keep an eye on them. The cases of women who said this is enough, usually because they want a new life for their kids. They said that, basta. And they're not successful. The Camorra instead, it was interesting because some of the cases of these women were very famous ones. There was one, Peta, who she did her own murder for the honor of her husband who had been slain. She went to jail and everything came out. Then in the film, there's a famous film on her. She played herself in this film, but the authors of the book tried to interview her. Nobody, no woman that was involved in the Camorra would speak with these people, whereas women who had been in Cosa Nostra and gotten out, they would give interviews. They would say, well, turning into a witness for justice has been positive. I've made a new life for my kids. I've got a life now. But nobody from the Camorra would do it. So that's, and that's another thing too that I didn't draw out. But these mafias they each have their own kinds of structures of power. They have, even though they may share certain kinds of rituals because they become kind of hybridized in certain ways. So they may share certain rituals for the induction or something like that. But their structure of power, you have kind of this pyramid of power with Ndrangheta that is both horizontal as well as vertical. They did find out just recently that it does have a kind of a cupola, or this commission at the head, but then it's also based on these blood ties. Camorra almost all horizontal, which is part of the problem in Naples because you've got one clan that's got total power over one block, and then down the street a different one, so they keep having these feuds and turning the streets into civil war and things. And then Cosa Nostra, that's primarily vertical, so it's interesting. Yes?
Would you say in the areas where the mafia doesn't have as much influence on the people outside of their actual bases of influence, is there much anti-mafia support or activity? And have you seen or have you noticed or increase of that with media?
Yeah, I think there's an amazing increase, in part because a lot of these anti-mafia associations creates, relations, sister schools, and so you have Libera, for example. You could say, okay, its main base is in Sicily with Palermo and Libera Terra, where they have confiscated lands that have been confiscated from the mafia, turned them into these wonderful cooperatives and things. But
they have internships and
yes, they do.
English speakers to go, and there's opportunities.
If you look at Libera International,
is that the Libera?
Yep.
Yeah, it's just amazing the opportunities. Sant'Anci tutti from Calabria, they go into schools that are in Lombardy, that are in different areas of Italy. Even in the case, this is very interesting with Milan, when Lea Garofalo, who was, I mean, she was in a family, something like 7 generations of Ndrangheta members. And she'd had enough. She was going to leave her husband when he was in jail. And they had moved to Milan. Now, when she was murdered by her husband, her daughter Denise went to the trial, which was held in Milan. These students in the local, the equivalent of high school, as well as the university there, were there every single day. And they started up their group of Libera, right, in that area. And again, young people who said, we have got to change the mentality of Northern Italians who think that they are immune to this. The mafia is outside our doors. It's outside this courtroom, right? And with local politicians colluding as well. Because you can't, you know, and so it's interesting. So they have definitely spread, you know, just an amazing amount through their work on the peninsula and through new media, getting messages out and that kind of thing, and these types of opportunities they offer for young people. I think young people are absolutely the hope and future. You know, some of these young people, I had the marvelous opportunity to do a Skype session for my students with Eduardo Zaffuto of Dio Pizzo in Palermo, and he made the point that because he was probably in his early teens when the massacres happened, and when he got out of college, they wanted to do this pub, and when they made up their business plan, one of them said, okay, but we've got to put aside money for the mafia. So pizza was part of the business plan. I'm like, oh, yeah, you gotta be kidding, we don't want to do that. And so they start up at Dio Pizzo. Well, so in the course of our Skype session and everything, as we get to the end, he said, you know, he said, we've increased the number of stores who are extortion free. They're out of the bracket. It's not the kind of success we'd like many more. But he said, I think that this is a generational cultural change. And he said, you know, my 8-year-old son, Mattia, he already is asking me, Dad, you know, I'm thinking that when I'm your age, I'm going to do this. So that, you know, the people who were college age in the 90s, they're now in their 30s. And as he says at the start of the Skype, he says, you know, I'm no longer really, you know, that young. But then, you know, his son. And so I think that this is something most particular. I think the biggest influence is definitely in Sicily. In fact, we named that video A Mafia-Free Sicily because that's what he talks about. And if you have a chance, that if you go on YouTube, and you can, on YouTube, either put in Robin Pickering-lazzi or Robin Pickering-lazzi and Eduardo Zaffuto. I don't have many videos on there. That looks like the only one that's legit, actually. But it's about an hour long, and he's fascinating to listen to. He did it in English. He's got great English. He's a really, you know, he's just a fun guy. You'd love to go out and have a beer with him or something. So.
But even Libera Terra, right? The original, I mean, I brought my students for many years, but I know some Libera Terra for weekends, and I tell the story that when they started, no one would volunteer, no one would work. They're often in real jobs, right? Yeah. But they were still afraid of revenge. We all see many people that were not put in prison and that kind of stuff. Sure. Even as, I mean, even as recent as a year or two ago, they still burn the fields. Yeah. You know, in Calabria and Puglia and Sicily and Catania. All the time, you know, so these things are still very real. Right, yeah. No, you're absolutely right. One of my students, because there was a discussion session afterwards, said, look, you know, I'm too afraid. I was amazed by two things. First of all, he said, well, no, because we're a lot of people. We're a lot of people. I'm going to do over there. The other thing was, at the end of the session, his son popped in, right? So we've got this marvelous footage of Mattia, who's there, and, you know, goes like that. And so when we were doing the editing, I wrote to Eduardo and I said, hey, listen,
there's this footage of your son. I'm assuming you want it edited out, right? And he said, no, keep it, right? And so I said, well, I said, listen, we'll send you your version, which will have it and things, but the version we post on YouTube, we stop. Yeah, we stop at that point and things. So it was amazing the strength of his conviction, both in the sense of cultural change and in the sense of him not feeling individually at risk, or his son, but cute son.
Before we close, I just want to say that there are the lyrics translated in English here in the front, in the bright, bright, bright green, so you can't
Oh,
miss it.
nice. I love that color.
And then if you are interested in actually reading through Professor Pickering-Lazzi's paper, she actually shared that with us too.
Yeah, and it's, let me say, that one is a close reading of the video.
Okay.
So, you know, may not be everyone's taste.
So if you're
but
interested in
it's-
dialect and things, Mr. Moran.
Oh, yeah. It's absolutely beautiful.
So let's thank Dr. Pickering-Lazzi.